Good afternoon, everyone. The time is now 3 p.m. I am calling to order the October regular meeting of the Cobb County Board of Elections and Registration at 3 p.m. With that, I invite all those that are willing and able to rise with me to say the pledge, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everyone should have received a copy of the agenda. If there are no motions to amend the agenda, I will entertain a motion to approve it as provided.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Is there a second? It's been moved and properly seconded to to approve the agenda as provided. All those in favor? The motion passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is public comment. I note that we have 4 individuals that will be providing public comment virtually, 9 that are here in the BOC room with us. Is there a motion with respect to the shortening of time? Yes, Mr. Bruning?
I move that we have a 3-minute comment session.
Mr. Bruning's motion is to set the amount of time allocated to each individual that participating in public comment to 3 minutes. Is there a second? Okay, Ms. Fisher, thank you. It's been moved and properly seconded to allocate 3 minutes to each public commenter. All those in favor? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you. So those of you that are here, as well as hopefully those that are joining us virtually can hear me, each of you will have 3 minutes to provide your public comment. And again, I note that 9 folks are in person with us, 4 are online. So we'll go ahead with Miss Melissa Snider Pike. I believe she is in person. Hello.
Good afternoon. Hello. First, I want to thank y'all for the work that you do. I know often public service can feel thankless. You put yourself frequently in the line of fire of a lot of heated discussions, and I just want to say thank you. I know one of the issues that is under consideration by the board is about the hand counting. That is the recommendation from the State Elections Board. And what I would ask for is just consistency by the board. If we're going by the law as it is encoded for the state of Georgia with regard to the commission districts, as they are, boundaries are written, and which means we're not going to be voting on commission districts 2 and 4 people on the board, then I would ask for us to also go by what is encoded in law for how we count ballots in Cobb County as we do in the rest of the state. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Snider Pike. Next up in the room, Debbie.
Newkowski.
Thank you. I did not want to mispronounce it. Newkowski. Yeah, Ms. Fisher's.
Are you supposed to do virtual next, or?
No. We're going to go 2 in, 1, 2 in, 1, given the inequity in the number that are here and that are those that are joining us. But nope, you're next.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Debbie Newkowski. I have lived in Cobb County for 19 years. I have been a poll watcher and a poll worker, and I want to acknowledge and express gratitude for the additional effort and expenditures made to improve polling locations' safety with improved rapid access to law enforcement. Thank you for adding panic buttons in the poll locations to summon law enforcement quickly, when also being sensitive to how on-site law enforcement may be intimidating for some voters. Thank you for your securing our safety so that we can do our jobs without needless dangers or distractions. The election boards are directed by law to certify election results by specific dates. I have been extremely grateful for the board's effort to deal with the new SCB rules that have been rejected by this Georgia Secretary of State and Attorney General as an overreach of their power as codified by the GS legislator. Please stand strong and know we support your defense of the current law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Nukowski, and thank you for your service as a poll worker. Next up, we'll go to virtual, Mr. Eugene Williams.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine, and hopefully you heard me at the outset of the public comment session or section. You will have 3 minutes, as will all public commenters, so you may go ahead and start, sir.
Okay, thank you. I would like to comment on the lawsuit that the board has filed to stop the implementation of several common sense rules the State Board of Elections recently passed. These rules included, among others, hand count rule and a recorded count rule, where the poll workers count the number of ballots cast, match them to the tabulator tapes to make sure the numbers are equal. I believe it's a very important safeguard for our election process, and it's just a simple method to match the number of people that voted with the number of ballots counted. It's just good quality basic accounting. It's really called balancing your books. Here's a great example of why we need to count the number of ballots cast, make sure they match the number of voters that actually showed up at the precinct to vote. And this was brought up in the State Board of Elections meeting this past Tuesday, was that in the most recent federal election held in Georgia in 2022, there were 34,304 more people that voted than they found ballots to count. Now let that sink in. 34,304 missing ballots. Now you talk about disenfranchising the voters of Georgia. In fact, the Epic Times had an article just a few days ago on the 11th of this month, and they stated 47 U.S. elections ended in ties or were decided by a single vote 2024. And a study by the Public Interest Legal Foundation found that since 2022, there have been 635 ties and 173 elections decided by a single vote across the country. Every single vote counts. We've got to make sure we're counting every single vote that was cast. CAVA specifies the legal limit is 8 erroneous ballots per million cast that they find acceptable. And that number would be only 32 for that particular 22 Georgia federal election. They were 1,000 times over that legal limit. And that is exactly why we need to be counting ballots and matching that number to the tabulator tape to make sure everything matches up. And I'm thankful to the State Board of Elections that they implemented some good common sense rules to help people have a little more trust in how our elections are being run. And frankly, it's sad to watch this board vote to waste more of our taxpayer dollars really trying to thwart that process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Next here with us in person, Elizabeth Hendrickson, please.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank the members of this board and the elections officials for all their hard work under stressful and at times needlessly hostile circumstances. I appreciate the staff and the board members who took time from their busy days to address the State Elections Board at recent meetings, making certain that Cobb's voice is clearly heard. Thank you for establishing procedures, including pilots of additional workers at openings and closings to handle the last-minute changes from the State Elections Board in the most efficient way possible so that we can have confidence that our elections will run smoothly. I appreciate your recognition of the difficulties that some face in scheduling time and transportation to vote by making some Saturday and Sunday voting available. I know this takes extra energy, coordination, and effort, but it sends a strong signal that Cobb values the votes of all citizens. There are already many checks and balances and redundancies that keep our votes secure. I trust this board and the elections staff to manage the chain of custody of all ballots, even with the recent unnecessary rules, making certain that all votes are tracked and counted accurately. Thank you for this opportunity to speak and for your role in keeping Cobb's elections both secure and accessible.
Thank you, Ms. Hendrickson. Ms. Kari Greer.
Good afternoon. My name is Kari Greer, and I've been a resident of Cobb County for over 20 years. And I want to talk today about the lawsuit that you filed against the state election board to block the new rules. I want to know what exactly you're afraid of, that you need to waste more of our tax money on legal fees. As someone who cares very deeply about election integrity, I've been asking for more transparency at the precinct level. You know, I always thought that the whole point of conducting elections at the precinct level is so that citizens can have more oversight and we could see how our elections are being conducted. But now we have machines and we have centralized counting centers and we're told, just trust us. Well, when it comes to government, I'm a big believer in trust but verify. You know, I see all the arguments that you've stated in your court filing against these rules. You said it exceeds board authority, it's unreasonable, it's adopted too close to the election. Respectfully, I'm going to have to call BS on that. The first time I worked a 15-hour shift on election day, I was shocked that we did not count the ballots before we sealed them up. I was told we don't do that anymore. It made me very uncomfortable. You know, I was exhausted, but I would have been willing to take the extra few minutes that it took to count the ballots for my own peace of mind. You know, we all know counting, it's just a very rote task. Any adult can do it, even if they're tired. And it's just a basic reconciliation, just like the gentleman said earlier. And let's not forget, it was done routinely until a few years ago. So I have to wonder, why did we stop? You know, as citizens who care very deeply about election integrity, it's very insulting to us for you to say that these are unreasonable, that it's too close to the election, or that it exceeds the board's authority. Now, and if you're really concerned about the workers getting too tired, and I believe you are concerned, that is a real concern, I'm wondering what happened to the plan to try out half-day shifts on election day. So one last thing, I want to say that I really appreciate the clarification on certification and what that means, because I think it's absurd to expect a board member to blindly sign off on something without even looking at it.
Ms. Greer, that's the conclusion of your time. I did want to give you the opportunity to finish your sentence, but that was the conclusion of your time.
One more sentence?
You've already exceeded your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Ahmad Sali.
Yeah, my name is Ahmad Sali. I'm a Cobb County resident. First, a historical note. Joseph Goebbels was Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda for the Nazis during World War II. He had a saying that if you're going to tell a lie, tell a big lie, and then repeat it over and over, and pretty soon people will start to believe you. His lie that he repeated was that Jews were responsible for the Germans' economic collapse in the 20s. Actually, it was the Treaty of Versailles, which called for Germany to pay reparations to the Allies, plus hyperinflation, and then the stock market crashed in '29. It was not the Jews. The end result of all of this was the Holocaust. 6 million Jews murdered, concentration camps, 5.3 million Germans killed during World War II out of a total population of 50 million. The survivors were starving, eating garbage, drinking from sewers. The buildings have been bombed to rubble, mostly by us and the English. About 1 million women were raped. It was terrible, all from a bunch of lies. Fast forward to today. We have Trump telling his lies about immigrants being murderers, rapists, and crazy people, that they're part of a migrant crime wave and that they're eating pets. All lies. In fact, crime, violent and property crime, has been going down for about 30 years. And what little crime remains is being done 70% of the time by Americans. This is from the FBI, the BJS, and law enforcement all across the US. Even fentanyl, which is 95% made in Mexico, is smuggled across the border 70% of the time by white American drug mules who are paid by the cartels. Immigrants have built this country. They continue to do so. Only the countries of origin have changed. They work hard, they start businesses, they have families. Both Trump and Vance are married to immigrants, and Kamala's mom is an immigrant. Every person in this room is either an immigrant or a descendant of immigrants. Ronald Reagan once said in 1990 that we don't need to deport immigrants, we need more of them to keep Americans strong. What we don't need are more racist, hating, narcissistic, homophobic, lying criminals like Trump. And we're gonna get rid of him on the 5th, and afterwards, we're gonna finish those trials we started and then lock him up. That's right, lock him up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sali. Next up is Janet Rao, online.
Janet Rao.
Or virtual? I'm sorry, ma'am, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Janet Rao, and I am a 34-year resident of Cobb County, and I'm speaking on my own behalf. Thank you to the board and staff as you continue to navigate the challenges created by people determined to undermine our tradition of fair and free elections in this country. It is this consistent effort to spread disinformation and create chaos that has made me asked to speak today. I've spent the last 26 years of my professional life as an educator in Cobb County. As such, I've taught students from preschool through high school and always encouraged them to use their critical thinking skills to help them navigate the complexities of the modern world. These complexities, however, have taken a dark turn. We now find ourselves pushing back against outright lies and propaganda comparable to that employed during World War II. We even have a current leader of the Cobb Republicans on video in her Washington, D.C. hotel room on January 5th, 2017, advocating for her followers to join in the events of January 6th. I do not see how these people can look at themselves in a mirror and think that they are promoting democracy. I do not see how anyone can look around the incredible diversity of Cobb County and find anger instead of joy. And I do not see how the continued efforts to undermine our current elections can be tolerated as the radical right moves ever closer to fascism. I do see this board standing up and making sure that the people of Cobb County are given every opportunity under the law to vote and to have their votes count. Thank you for holding that line clearly in your decisions, including the decision to push back against the overreach of the State Board of Elections. I'm thankful that Cobb has consistently done post-election reviews to demonstrate that the elections have been correctly and accurately managed, building confidence from those of us who do have critical thinking skills intact. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Rao. Next up, John Southall.
Hello, I'm John Southall. I'm a Cobb County resident. I'm a Cobb County poll worker. And when a voter comes into a polling place, the first thing they do is they sign a certificate of oath saying that they're eligible to vote in Georgia. Then they go to the poll worker who has the list of eligible voters. They register, find out that they're appropriately registered. It's 2. Then they're giving a voting card where they go to a ballot marking device where they choose they select their candidates. That's recorded. Then, after they select their candidates, they print a ballot. And they're able to review that ballot and make sure that it is the candidates that they chose. So they take that ballot to a scanner, they run it through the scanner, and that is the point where their vote is actually registered and counted. That's 4. That ballot drops down into a bin, and that paper ballot is there available for audit purposes, which this year, I guarantee every single piece of paper will be reviewed a dozen times or more. So if 4 times where that voter is counted that they arrived, counted that they've been given a ballot, counted that they made a vote, and their actual vote being cast, counted 4 times, how many more? If 4 is not enough, how many times is enough to satisfy some people that there is no integrity in our Georgia election system? So if you look back at 2016, we had a ballot system where you came in, you filled out a certificate, signed the oath, gave your ID to a person who verified you were eligible to vote. You went to a voting machine, made your choice, you pushed the button, and walked out the door. You had no evidence as to who you voted for. You had evidence that you walked in the door. You had the evidence that you voted, but there was no audit trail. Donald Trump won the election in 2016. Nothing available to prove who you voted for. And everybody was happy. There were no objections whatsoever to Donald Trump winning. Fast forward to 2020. We have the same process. They had all of the evidence available to audit. They had the certificates of oath that they signed. They had the ballots that they had available to not only audit the number of votes cast, but exactly who those votes were cast for.
Mr. Southall, your time has expired. We thank you.
Thank you. I should have become more prepared.
No worries. Donna Court.
Good afternoon. This is Donna Court, and I am a Cobb County resident in zip code 30068. And I, too, have been a poll worker for the last several years. And I'll just say I ditto everything that the last speaker said, and as far as the integrity and counting all the reconciled ballots with the machine-generated receipts. And the purpose in my call today is to thank Director Fall, Chair Silas, all of our board members. I too am very grateful that the election will be certified. One of our speakers has just mentioned that they are sad that our board is taking a stand to defend itself. I am happy because you are actually defending us. I will tell you what does make me sad. It makes me very sad that in this day and time, let me rephrase that it has to even be discerned that we have to have panic buttons and protections to call in authorities to protect our poll workers. I will just say that 20 years ago, that was unheard of. And we're all on the same side, just American citizens. And why is everybody sad that the election board is doing the wonderful things that you are? I'm very happy. I am sad that we have to have protection for us, your election workers. I'm still waiting to see how long that we will have to stay on election night. But I do trust the board, and I know that you are doing the right thing. And I am very happy and proud to be a member of Cobb County, and I thank you kindly for all that you do. And please stay safe out there, and May a shield of protection be around you and us on election day. And FYI, it's going to take longer than usual, the certification process, because of what the state board has done. It may be until the following week before we hear anything, but it's not because of you guys. Thank you, our wonderful Board of Elections. Thank you and have a lovely, safe day.
Thank you, Mrs. Court. Next up here in the room, Patricia Hay.
My name is Patricia Hay, and as a Georgia native, I'm speaking to you about my concerns with Cobb County's election security. As an experienced poll worker, boots on the ground, so to speak, many voters have expressed to me their concerns about the lack of security when casting their votes. And what am I supposed to tell them when the Dominion encryption key is in plain text and all over the internet? Also, and what am I supposed to tell them? Anyway, and this password has been around since 2008. They never change it because it's embedded in the system. So this is not right. When I was in the private sector, I had to change my passwords every 90 days. Didn't like it, but I had to do it. As a poll worker who pays attention to current events, I've become aware that the Cobb BOE is suing the state election board over their September 20th rule changes. I am endorsing the SEB's rule change regarding manual counting of paper ballots on election day. It's true I have already received my training, but we routinely get last-minute instructions on election day that are immediately put into action. I am confused as to why the Cobb County Election Board doesn't want the change to make our elections more safe and secure. I have also observed that this board shows great hesitancy and resistance to cleaning the voter rolls of people who have moved out of state. It is incomprehensible to me why you're objecting to something so reasonable. And by the way, we are a republic, not a democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hay. Next up is Mike Benz. Mr. Benz.
Thank you. The name's Mike Benz. I'm a citizen. I've lived in Cobb County for over 20 years. Appreciate the service of the board and the staff and everyone involved in the process, which I know has been difficult. Again, thank you for maintaining a legal, orderly process by establishing procedure guidelines and protocols to deal with the new SEB rules that have been rejected by the Georgia Secretary of State, a Republican, Attorney General, a Republican, and Governor Kemp, all acknowledging it's an overreach of their power as codified by the Georgia legislature. The state election board has essentially acknowledged this overreach by already lobbying to change the rules in the next legislative session. So stand strong. Know we support your defense of the current law. Thank you also for granting access to voting on Saturdays and Sundays. We know this required additional energy and staff. Voting is a right, and accessibility is mandatory and should reflect real people, their lives, and their capacity to find the time off work or to arrange transportation to exercise the right to vote. Paulding, Douglas, and Clayton do not have Sunday voting. Thank you for representing all of your Cobb constituents by expanding access to the polls. Election boards are directed by law to certify election results by a specified date. This does not mean you may not, as individuals on the board, object to discrepancies that arise, but what is required from all board members is an acknowledgement that our election system has checks, balances, and security redundancies to address these discrepancies without interfering with the legally mandated certification. To not meet the certification deadline is a personal admission of having failed to meet your legally mandated duty to properly plan, oversee, and administer the very election results you then claim are invalid. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benz. Next up online is Todd Crowder. Mr. Crowder.
Thank you. My name is Todd Crowder, and I'm a resident of Cobb. Thank you to the Board of Elections for considering the new openers and closers pilot. We could significantly alleviate worker fatigue by providing dedicated staff to assist poll workers with setting up in early morning and closing down sites at the end of the day. This is especially crucial if rule changes requiring precinct-level ballot counts on Election Day go into effect. We've already seen neighboring counties like Paulding report the need for over 130 additional workers to manage these end-of-day procedures efficiently. While the original goal of this pilot might not have been ballot counting, your forward-thinking approach could serve as a model for others. We must balance new procedures with a focus on cost-effective election administration, so please continue fighting to prevent unnecessary changes and maintain low taxes and sustainable election costs. Thank you for your leadership in exploring these innovations to protect our election integrity and resources.
Thank you, Mr. Crowder. And finally, Ms. Sally Grubs.
Good afternoon, Board. My name is Sali Grubs. I am the chairwoman of the Cobb Republican Party, and I also have authored some of the rules before the State Election Board that have been passed. And let me just say that, first of all, it's very disappointing when I was going through the petition and looking at it that you as a board, I guess, have approved the legal representation. I guess Mr. White needed some assistance. But it's very disappointing to see that one of the signatures on here is Nikhil Suss with Crew, who's an extreme partisan organization, that you're using our tax dollars for that. And as everybody's concerned about security, I've asked and not gotten a response, how many times have there been authorities who have had to take an action at a polling location or at the center because of the threat or the happenstance of any actions against poll workers or poll watchers? You know, $50,000 that Ms. Fall spent on that, when everybody carries their cell phone, I think you can call 911 probably quicker than you can use your thing. I'd love to see a time study on that. And all of this about counting the ballots, people are intentionally misleading. You, in filing this lawsuit, are intentionally misleading the public about the time it's going to take. And you've proven that through your own study. And it's evidenced in your complaint, Mr. White. In 2020, with the COVID in-person voting, the approximate averages for some of the large counties were, if you're talking about just counting ballots in 2020 per scanner on average, do you have any idea how many Cobb County ballots there were to count for in-person Election Day voting? The average is 173. Y'all are putting out misinformation about the time it would take to count the ballots. There's been misinformation put out there about counting votes. It's not counting votes, and you know that, but you're not putting out correct information. The largest county Election Day per scanner counts in Cherokee County, 582, and that was the highest one in the state on average. And you say you have questions about these rules. The rules are giving a voice to the procedure in accordance with the legislative passed law. It's gone through legislative review. And there is, in fact, in the rule that I wrote about the ballots and the drop boxes, that almost all of them say and shall certify by 5:00 p.m. on the Monday following the election. In addition to that, I'm out of time. Thank you, Mr. Bruning, for increasing it to 3 minutes. I don't think it's because you wanted to hear from me, because there's a whole lot more I could say on that, and I would be happy to answer any questions which no one's asked.
Thank you, Ms. Scruggs. That concludes the public comment portion of the meeting. We'll now move on to the next item on the agenda. That is the approval of our meeting minutes. Everyone should have before them meeting minutes for our September 9th meeting that was prematurely adjourned, the September 16th meeting, and then our special called meeting on September the 30th. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the meeting minutes? And are there any proposed revisions or proposed changes to the meeting minutes? Yes, Ms. Fisher?
I provided my changes, which didn't make the final, so you already heard mine.
When you say you provided, I know that you provided an email that made reference to certain modifications. Did you provide like a red line showing where you wanted those changes to be made? Did
I didn't make a red line. I made comments which sections. I would think that should be sufficient. I just wanted it on the record that I did provide recommended changes.
Understood.
Okay, thank you.
I note that Mr. Bruning provided some revisions and he redlined them into the document. I did the same thing.
I'm not as efficient, I guess.
No, I understand. Mr. Bruning actually did his in handwriting that I was able to read. Thank you for that. Then I modified them, included them in my revisions. I think, is there anything else? What we're happy to do, I guess, just attach that as your comments to it. Or Ms. Fall, you have those, correct?
Correct, yes,
Okay.
an email.
All right. The other option would be to postpone the approval of these meeting minutes. As our secretary, Ms. Affret, do you have a suggestion here?
I'm fine with attaching your comments if that's the easiest way to move forward.
Okay. And then the only other point that I would make, well, first, is there anything further from anyone else with respect to the meeting minutes? The only other comment that I would make, I did not have time to go back and review the recording, but I think there were just a couple of areas where we had not or did not identify who the movant or the person that made the second was. And this is in I believe those are on the 16th. It's a little bit difficult to say. Yes, during the meeting on the 16th, there were a couple of areas where it was unclear as to whom, again, was the movant with respect to the motion to dismiss challenges as provided on August the 29th, and then to table the bylaws discussion. So if that could just be supplemented. I just didn't have time to go back and review the recording. Yes, sir.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I suggest we get these cleaned up and then vote on them
At the next meeting. Okay, that sounds good. Is everyone in agreement with that? Yes, sir.
It's particularly, at least for the regular meeting, the preference is to go ahead and, adopt them so you have a record from like at your next meeting. Sort of like the standard practice for, governing agencies is to approve your minutes at the next one. So, if there's, I would approve, I would make every effort to sort of approve what you can. If there are some, like the special called meeting that's recent, that's fine because you're not 30 days up, but anything that's sort of a regular meeting, you might want to try to go ahead and get them in shape today to approve them. Just so
Okay, and in the event that they are approved today, I personally don't have, I'm not gonna say I don't have the time, but as far as reading Mrs. Fisher's comments and then redlining them on the fly during the course of this discussion, I don't know that that would be the most efficient way in moving forward. So how do you, Mr. White, propose that we deal with that?
I'm looking.
I think those were for the 30th. My comments mostly were related to the 30th, so that wouldn't apply today.
Okay. So let's do this. Why don't we take them one by one? Any proposed revisions and or comments to the September 9th meeting minutes as provided? Hearing none, I will accept a motion to approve these meeting minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and properly seconded to approve the meeting minutes for our September 9th, 2024 regular board meeting. All those in favor? The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the next meeting, September the 16th, that was our continued meeting, a regular meeting. It's noted as a special called board meeting, but obviously it was for the purposes of concluding the business that we were to take up on September the 9th. And again, it's in this meeting that it's not even a revision, it's really just a notation as to who made the motions, those two motions. So with that noted, is there a second? Pardon me, is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it, but I will second it, but can we make sure when these are printed and posted that they're in a vertical format versus landscape?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. It's been moved and properly seconded to approve these meeting minutes, subject to the format, pardon me, the layout, as well as noting the movements for two motions that were made. Those modifications will be made. All those in favor of accepting the approval? The motion passes unanimously. So with respect to the meeting minutes for the special called board meeting, Mr. White, we are going to simply defer that to our November meeting? Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. And Ms. Fisher, I will go and take a look at your email and assist in providing a proposed red line based upon your comments. Okay. Moving on, is there any new business that the board believes we need to take up? Hearing none, we'll go on to the election office reports and updates. Ms. Fall, you're up.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm gonna get some slides pulled up, and then we will walk through kind of what each department is doing and where we're at. And then I'm also gonna cover the SEB rules that have been enacted and what we're doing to make sure we're in compliance of those new rules. So we will jump in. So absentee by mail. The most important thing to remember with absentee by mail, if this is how you're voting, is you can track your ballot. You can actually sign up for updates, which is new, that's integrated. You used to have to go to that platform independently. Now it's integrated through MVP. So you can do that at your MVP. So we're using a third-party vendor to mail out our ballots for this election, Fort Orange Press. We're very grateful for that. It would have been almost what felt like probably impossible lift to mail out 18,000, almost 19,000 ballots, while also processing thousands and thousands of absentee applications a day. So this was as of Friday, the end of the day Friday, at their reconciliation meeting they have at the end of the day. So at that time, Fort Orange Press had mailed out 18,943 ballots. We had mailed out 387 provisional ballots. We do that in-house to make sure that everything that's included needs to be included. We've done 1,536 UOCAVAs via EBD or email. So people who are UOCAVA uniformed overseas voters can opt in to receive their ballot via email. They still have to print it, mark it, and mail it back to us along with the oath of the voter, of the elector, just like a regular absentee ballot. And then we have also mailed 102 UOCAVA ballots via USPS. So some people still opt in to receive those ballots via USPS. So when we add those four numbers together, we do match what Jarvis is showing of 20,968 ballots issued. So we're able to reconcile kind of those four different pots of mail ballots that are being sent out with how many Jarvis is telling us we've issued ballots to voters. So as of a couple minutes before the meeting started, we had reached almost 31,000 absentee applications. So we still continue to receive more applications, and we continue to process them, and now we're in the time frame where we get them turned around in 36 hours. So we are really, really grateful for our partners at Fort Orange Press in helping us alleviate some of that burden, what would have been in the office.
Okay, and just, I know there likely is a lot that you need to get through. What's most effective or efficient for you? For us to hold our questions until the end, or raise them on a subject by subject basis?
I think subject by subject, just so we're all on the same page, would be helpful.
Exactly. Okay, hence the reason I asked the question. Mr. Bruni, go right ahead. Other one. Gotcha.
Thank you. Sorry. Where does Fort Orange Press mail the ballots from?
Fort Orange Press is located in upstate New York. And so they're the only certified absentee by mail vendor by Dominion on the East Coast. So they're the vendor that all Georgia counties use. If they use a third-party vendor for absentee by mail, they're using Fort Orange Press. And so we haven't noticed a delay in the ballots. The first ballots were dropped at the end of the day on 10/7, of course, when we uploaded that initial file. And people were receiving their ballots by Wednesday. We had people walking in their ballots Wednesday. I know Board Member Efrat, she had received her ballot, I think Thursday? Wednesday?
I got it Friday afternoon.
Friday afternoon. So people are receiving their ballots within that typically normal time frame. Absentee ballots are sent election mail first class, so having that election mail designation allows them to jump all the other mail. And so we haven't noticed an initial delay. So we're hopeful that USPS is partnering with us and helping us make sure that that continues. And the lobby was full when I left today of people returning their ballots. So we've been already busy with that.
Are we tracking through Fort Orange how many returned ballots there are due to bad addresses or whatever, undeliverable?
So the return address is still going to be our address. So any returned mail or undeliverables will come to our office. So
Are we
we'll get
tracking those?
Yes, of course. We keep all returned mail. So that ballot goes to absentee by mail. They're alerted that that ballot was returned for whatever reason. They contact the voter, and then that's also keyed on their voter registration that we received return mail.
Okay, and then I also have a question. So it seems we have around 11,000 that haven't yet been mailed.
This was as of Friday, so we worked over the weekend, but it's a little bit less than that, but yes.
Have any of the 11,000 been processed and accepted, just
Yes.
not mailed?
Yes,
And-
so as of the 31,000, let me look. As of right now, we have 31,079 total applications, and 23,000 of those have been accepted, noting that about 2,500, almost 2,600 of those are in further review. So that's not necessary that they're going to receive a ballot if their application could have been rejected, or if they're under cure, then that would be a provisional issued, which is what we're doing in-house.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Does anyone else have any questions for Mrs. Fall? I do have a question. Fort Orange Press, this is the first time we've used them?
For absentee by mail.
For absentee by mail.
Yes, they've printed our election day emergency ballots, provisional ballots. That contract has been in place since before I got here.
Okay.
so.
But as far as processing and mailing out our absentee by mail ballots, and your impression thus far, obviously, they're probably not this number, but there was a large request for absentee ballots by mail during the presidential preference primary. So if you could just share your impressions, the impact, positive or negative, that it's had for our office.
Sure. So I know in May, we mailed just under 5,000 absentee by mail ballots for the May general primary. So obviously a pretty big jump. And that was a big lift for our office because it was a 2-card ballot, so it had to be a manual process. We couldn't use the inserter for that. And so to be able to have a vendor alleviate that issue where we had a whole team that was just folding and stuffing, now everyone can be on the applications because we have such a high volume of applications, and we can add more people to the cure team to make sure that we're responding to those voters in a timely manner, has been a huge stress relief for the office. And I think the team is really grateful both for Fort Orange Press and for the new absentee application system that we've implemented. I think it's really helped when voters call in. We can pull up their application because they only go in Jarvis. Your application only goes in Jarvis once it's been accepted and issued or issued provisionally. So all those steps before that is not reflected in Jarvis. And so now people in the call center, if someone says, hey, I submitted my application, I haven't got my ballot, they can search them in that system, pull it up and say, oh, I see you're at this team, or you're at the cure for this reason, and they're able to communicate that with them sooner than we're even able to send them an email.
Okay. Sounds like we're getting good information to Cobb voters with regard to where their application is, and then subsequently that their ballot has been issued.
Yeah.
Okay. Unless there is anything further for Ms. Fall, we'll go on to the next part of your report.
Awesome. So next is AIP, starts tomorrow, so we're really excited. All the sites are set up. And so these are our locations. So any location that are bold is going to be one of our Sunday voting locations. All of our locations will be open Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. starting tomorrow. And then those 5 locations will be open on Sundays, noon to 5 p.m. Anywhere with an asterisk has a drop box, and the other locations will be accepting absentee by mail ballots with the chain of custody form, which I'll talk about when I get to the SEB rules. So I'll be sure to cover that process there. We also will post our wait time map tomorrow. That's one of, I think, the most underutilized resources we have, is we'll have a wait time map that reflects the real wait times at all 12 locations. So you can check that out before you leave to make sure you're waiting in the shortest line you can. Some of our sites tend to be busier than others, and so that's a great option for people who maybe are shorter on time or on their lunch break or things like that. So the team is ready. We'll be at the office at 5 a.m. tomorrow to get everyone ready and make sure everyone opens on time and we get the first voters in the door. So the team's really excited to get started.
Okay. Anything with respect to AIP, or as more colloquially known, early voting? My only question is the wait time. Thank you for ensuring that is accessible via the website. Is it going to be on the front page above the fold, or
we'll highlight it, and then we will also have it on the advanced voting page. Okay. So where the flyer is, we'll have it on that page as well. So we'll highlight it, and that'll take you to that subsequent link.
Okay. Just want to ensure that voters can easily access it or find it on the page.
Absolutely.
Okay. If there's nothing further for Ms. Fall, we'll go on to the next item.
Awesome. So the elections department has been really busy with poll worker training. We're fully staffed with our regular workers. We have 1,733, and we have 243 backup workers hired. We're filling in a few more spots there. So area supervisors have been reaching out to people, seeing if they're interested in being a backup worker. We've trained 1,611 workers total, and then an additional 320 workers have attended provisional training. So those kind of overlap since it's people who are going to other trainings as well. So that's why I like to break that number out. So 1,611 humans have come through and taken a training class. And so we're at 93%, which is really great. We're excited about that. And so we'll be able to get those backup workers in, and if any of them need to come to training, we'll do that, or any last minute backup workers will do a virtual training that last week before the election. That's only open to emergency backup workers. They'll be able to do that virtual training that we do through 10X.
Okay. Any questions for Mrs. Fall with respect to hiring our poll workers? Go ahead, Mrs. Fisher.
On the 93% trained, what is the 7% that isn't? Are they the backup? Are they?
People just who haven't come yet. We still have training the rest of this week and all of next week. So people who are scheduled the rest of this week.
Is this for election day?
Yes. So we do in-person training through 2 weeks before, and then virtual training.
I must have missed that this was election day. Okay.
Yes,
Thank
sorry.
you.
Yes. Elections department.
And to be certain, are we in need of additional, I know there's a number that you've thrown out there, the 1,733 that's been hired. We have 243 that are backup workers that are hired. Again, they will fill in, things happen, workers can't show up, or, emergencies happen. But are we in need of any additional poll workers at this time?
No, not at this time. We've closed the application because we had such an outpouring of applicants. And I know some of our neighboring counties have as well. And so we've signed some waivers to release people to some of the counties in need. But we are not accepting any new applications at this time. And we're just pulling those last few backup workers from people who have already marked their availability in 10X who have previously applied.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Fisher?
Are we implementing the Adopt-a-Poll as part of these numbers?
So the Adopt-a-Poll pilot program is separate from this. So that's going to be a smaller program where we're currently using county employees to do that. We really want to make sure, I think this program could be really successful in the future, but since it's the first election we're doing it, we want it to be tested on a group of people that can give us feedback and that we can trust to show up and be there. And so that's going to be a smaller group. We're looking at potentially bringing the closers where they won't have a set location until that day, where we start to see those check-in numbers and we see those precincts that are going to have a really high number. And then if we have the hand count rule in place, we would deploy those closers to those particular sites to assist in the closing procedures while the manager and those 2 appointed workers are working on that hand count. So it's separate from this.
So do we have any kind of number or a proposed number that you'll entertain?
That of how many people we're going to be doing it?
Yes.
I don't have final numbers yet, no. We're still working, and then they're doing their training the week before the election.
Okay.
Unless there are additional questions with respect to the hiring and training of our poll workers, continue, Mrs. Fall.
So I want to talk about some of the safety improvements that we've implemented, both for early voting for Election Day and at our office. So I know that it was brought up in public comment about the panic buttons. So I had originally allotted some funding in the contingency fund to purchase panic buttons. But when I started working with 911 and ITS on the implementation, those panic buttons were linked to smartphones, and we issue flip phones still at our polling places, which meant that the poll managers would have to utilize their personal cell phones. And there were a lot of concerns about 148 different phones, operating systems, app, years, and all those things. So we decided to not move forward with that purchase. So that contract was never taken to the Board of Commissioners. So instead, we partnered with 911, where they're giving us radios. So the same radios our law enforcement uses. And so all AIP sites and polling places will have that radio. I have one, my AIP managers have one, and my elections manager has one. And those radios will be on our own encrypted channel. So they'll be able to speak directly to a dispatcher and get a hold of someone that's specially dedicated to that elections channel. And then they also are equipped with panic buttons. So they do have panic buttons on the top. I was at 911 when we were meeting about the radios, and they did a test on the panic button, and it lights up the whole 911 center. So it was really great to see. This is also a great alternative because we don't have to worry about cell service, which was a concern with the badges. So we're really grateful to our partners at 911 for allowing us to use these radios at no cost, because they're very expensive radios. So we're grateful for that. We are going to have a larger law enforcement footprint, both at AIP on Election Day. So for early voting, we'll have 2 sites have 100% manned sheriff. So that's our office, and Tim D. Lee Senior Center will have a sheriff. Anytime voting is going on, there'll be a sheriff's deputy there. And then the other remaining 10 sites, there'll be 1 per 2 sites. So a sheriff will go back and forth just between 2 sites. Previously, they were rotating between 4 or 5 sites, so they were only there for a short amount of time. So we've increased that presence. And then the 3rd week, they'll be 100% manned. So all 12 sites will have a sheriff's deputy the entire final week of early voting. So we'll have that for that last week when we're going to be really busy. We've also increased some security measures at the main office. So we've implemented more badge access in some of the hallways. I know some of y'all have seen that when you've come by. We have a security guard in the lobby to help with just being open to the public. We've had some incidents with different members of the community and being open. They come in. And so we're grateful for that. We'll have that through the end of the year. And then we also have put in things at the suggestion of the Department of Homeland Security assessment that was done last year. So those are things like the bollards in front of the gas lines and in front of some of the glass entrances over by the prep center on the other side where we load a lot of equipment, as well as some silent alarms throughout the building. So if a panic button is hit, then we all know that a panic button was hit, because we were pretty spread out in that office, and so it's hard to know what's going on the other side. And then last, we're really excited about Marietta PD's public safety ambassadors are going to be assisting with the traffic flow at our office. Y'all know it gets pretty full, that parking lot. So we will have the alternative parking at Roswell Street Baptist Church with a shuttle bus going back and forth. And so they're going to be helping us on our first day of voting tomorrow, and then the last week. So directing traffic, making sure people aren't parking on the fire lane, things like that. And then one other thing I wanted to mention about the law enforcement footprint for Election Day, we were able to make the kind of the routes for those smaller. The Cobb County School District's resource officers are going to be monitoring their schools, even though school is closed. So their school resource officer will be giving security at those locations on Election Day, which allows those routes for the sheriffs to be smaller. And so we're really grateful for their partnership and assisting us on their day off, and helping us make sure that everyone remains safe. And so we're grateful for them, and of course for Marietta PD in assisting us with the traffic flow, because it'll be busy.
Does anyone have any questions for Mrs. Fall with respect to her safety improvements report? I do have just a couple. Did you have questions? No. Okay. I do have a couple of quick questions. So just to be certain, the handheld radios that will be deployed to each of the locations, is there a cost associated with that?
No.
Okay. And then with respect to the ambassadors that are made reference to in the fourth bullet point, these are sworn law enforcement officials, correct?
Right, they just don't carry weapons.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Does anyone have anything else? Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
I have a couple of questions held over from the last meeting. First of all, how's our progress on the ADA process?
So we've met with our county partners to talk about the 2 county facilities that were on the list of 12. And so we are good to go with that. I think we're going to relocate the parking at Vinings Library like we discussed. And then at South Cobb Community Center, we're going to block that. The ramp that they noted that was out of compliance is really like a service delivery ramp. And so we're just going to block that, so that way voters don't try to use that. And so that's what we'll do there. And then we're working with the churches. We still haven't received any type of training or guidance from the DOJ on those. So in light of that, I wanted to utilize our resources for the team in locations where they are trained. And so they've been working on finishing up the site surveys with the electrical, with the updated numbers. And so that's been their focus until we're able to receive that training. And so we'll do everything we can with what we do know about the churches and the other locations. Most of it is parking related, and so we'll be sure to make sure we're placing that alternative spot in the best place. And then working on covering some cracks. We'll do some crack filler at some of the churches with their permission. At other places, we'll place non-slip mats over those cracks or threshold ramps to cover up large thresholds. So that's kind of our focus for those 12 sites.
If I might just interject, of those 12 sites, I believe only one is an AIP site, correct?
Correct, and that's the South Cobb Community Center. So we'll have that sign up tomorrow to make sure we're in compliance.
So then we're good to go for tomorrow?
Yes.
Excellent. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
On the ADA issue, there were a number of comments about the setup of the ADA station at each voting site. Have we figured out what the problem is and issued new instructions?
I think that AIP was fine. They did in their final managers meeting on Tuesday, they did a refresher on that specifically in that meeting with all the managers and assistant managers. So we'll be sure to include that in the last minute instructions for Election Day, because that's the document they all read the night before. And that way we will probably just pull what AIP is doing, since they're doing it correctly, and just utilize that. The table, the legs are marked of how high they're supposed to be set up. So that's why I'm not sure how that has happened. And so we will continue to make sure that we're instructing those managers to set up that table with the appropriate knee clearance.
Great, thanks.
Do you have anything further?
Nope.
Okay. Does anyone? All right. You have additional? Okay.
Yes.
Prep Center.
Okay, so our prep center, so we got the new equipment in, all of the scanners have been acceptance tested, and they've been integrated into the LNA process, so they've been integrated into the rest of the scanners. The pull pad printer acceptance testing has been partially completed. They came and did what we had taken out of the stock in order to have them for training, and so they replenished the ones we had for AIP, and then they're going to come back and finish the rest. So it's a pretty big lift. It'll take us about a week to finish the rest of them. They take up a lot of space. They're really big in their new containers, but we're really grateful and have gotten a ton of positive feedback and training about having those, so we're really grateful. Additionally, LNA testing is scheduled to be completed by the end of this week, so we're ahead of schedule. We're really excited about that. The staff has done a really great job improving every election this year and getting us in a place where we do it very efficiently, and we're testing all the ballot styles that we need to, and making sure that it's a transparent process. We still have observers coming. We had an observer today, and we're grateful to the observers who have come and hung out with us during LNA so they can see kind of the process we have. And then election day deliveries begin next week. So we'll have those, I think it should be the next week. Maybe. I'll have to look at my calendar. It all runs together. But we'll start those after LNA is testing. I believe, yeah, next weekend is when they'll start. So we will be delivering equipment, and everything will be sealed and ready to go by the end of this week. And we're excited to jump into election day now. So,
Mrs. Fisher?
On the deliveries that will go out next week, I realize that the carriers are locked and sealed. Well, everything should be locked and sealed, but where we can, are we locking this stuff up behind a closed door lock?
It depends on the site. I will check and see our delivery schedule and see what's starting to go out next weekend and see what those sites are. It's possible that they're the AIP locations, and so there's already election workers there. That way they're there for them to flip when they pick up the AIP equipment. So I'll have to double check with them and see. I haven't seen the delivery schedule yet, so I'll know when I see that.
Okay. But instructions have, I hope, been given where they can be, we lock them.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe, Mrs. Fall, that's been our consistent, directive, if you will. Obviously, everything is delivered, locked up, and to the extent that the polling location allows for locking up, and then we backload on the back end those that equipment being delivered to those locations or polling precincts where a physical lock is not accessible. I guess the better way to put it.
Right.
Okay. Ms. Fisher?
Did we start delivering 2 weeks prior to Election Day?
My recollection is, I'm happy to go back through old emails, but my recollection is that has been the case in the past.
Okay.
Yeah. And then with respect, I'm sorry, does anyone else have any questions? With respect to LNA testing, thank you for that update. You said you believe it will be completed by the end of this week.
Yes.
And so obviously, to the extent that it is currently still going on, we've provided sufficient notice such that the public is aware that it continues to go on and they have the ability to come and view.
Yes, yeah, we have a notice posted in the lobby, as well as the receptionists are briefed each day on where they're at and what's going on, so they know where to direct people.
Okay, and to the extent that anyone that is viewing this, whether here in this room or virtually, will you just share the time for LNA testing and the location?
Sure, so we start at 9 a.m. every morning at our office. We're in our office now, so we always start at the smaller warehouse across the street with the AIP equipment, and then we move to our warehouse for election day equipment. And so we're in our warehouse now, and we start at 9 a.m. every day. They typically wrap up by 4:30 and take a lunch around noon.
Okay, excellent, thank you. If there's nothing further with respect to the prep center?
So voter registration. So since the June runoff, since the last election, we've keyed 22,684 new registrations. So a pretty significant number for us. We've additionally updated approximately 65,000 voter registration records since the June runoff. So the team has been very busy. We're on track to complete all of our key updates by the end of today and in preparation for AIP tomorrow. I did want to note that on Saturday, I'm sure some of y'all saw the buzz post about kind of the backlog of hard cards in the Secretary of State's office. So on Saturday, when one of our members went to pick up our gray bag from the Secretary of State's office, they also handed him 1,500 hard cards and confirmations that were stamped prior to the registration cutoff. So that upped how much we had to key. And so that was a little bit of a setback, but the team worked all weekend to get back on track. And so I'm very grateful for their hard work. They worked some long hours this weekend. And so, no matter what comes up, they're always prepared. The backlog from the Secretary of State, I guess, when I spoke with the registration manager, was a bit unusual. There seemed to be some type of a breakdown when they received confirmation notices, for example, that were mailed in June and July, that were postmarked in July or August, but then they weren't stamped as received by the Secretary of State until October. So I'm not sure what that breakdown is on their end, but there is something going on. And so they said that this is everything and that we should be up to date at this point. And we continually send someone to their office to pick up boxes of cards and confirmations at least once a week. I think we did it 2 or 3 times last week. So we continue to stay up to date with what they can provide us when they provide it to us.
Ms. Fisher?
Did I hear that right? These were cancellations?
No, these were the confirmations, confirmation notices.
I thought you said cancellations.
No,
I'm like,
confirmation
oh my
notices.
gosh, okay. Good, that's good.
Yeah, that'd be bad.
Anyone else? Mr. Bruni, you're already on. Oh, okay. So to be certain, I know the number here is 1,500 plus hard cards and confirmations. That requires obviously keying from the team. They worked all weekend. Where do we believe we are? Obviously, as if you're leaving the office to come over here to join us, but thereabout, where do we believe we are with regard to what needs to be completed by, I wouldn't call it close of business, by the time our team leaves the office this evening?
I know when I checked in with the team this morning, because I had a bunch of meetings, and so I wanted to check in with them before I jumped into those, that they had, I believe it was right around 1,500 total, not just those hard cards, but some of those hard cards left, and then all 3 of the dashboard portals, so the MVP updates, any last DDS records that have come in, and then the OLVR records as well that were stamped prior. One of the things about the dashboard is that it's going to continue to grow even though the registration is closed. So they have to go in, and that number isn't how many they have left to do, but they have to go in and see how many records are left from before the deadline. And so they inched, it might not look like that when you log in, but when you open up the record, you can see based on date. So they've gotten through that, and I believe as of this morning when I spoke with the registration manager that they had right around 1,500 across the hard cards and those 3 portals to complete.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Fall with respect to voter registration and the work that the team is doing to make certain everybody is in that system such that they can vote if they elect to tomorrow morning at 7 a.m.? Hearing none, next up on your report.
All right, so these are just some key dates and deadlines I've put up before. Some have passed, but I wanted to make sure they were up there just for reference. So obviously AIP starts tomorrow, like we mentioned. The last day to apply for absentee by mail is October 25th. The last day of AIP will be Friday, November 1st, and of course Election Day is November 5th. So I always like to provide those as where we're at in the system. And what we still have left to do. So we joke that we're almost at the start. So it feels like we've been doing this for a long time, but we're almost ready to start. Okay.
Unless there's anything else, moving on to the new SCB rules.
All right.
And just to orient again, this report will be what?
Say again, sorry.
What are we reviewing with respect to this
So
report?
these are the rules that we've received from the Secretary of State as his seal and those new rules. So the ones that are, I think the 7 that are proposed to go into effect, we haven't received a certification from the Secretary of State on those rules, so I haven't moved forward on those. These are the ones that we've received the certification from him with the new rules, and he provides the certification for each new rule. So these are just focused on those.
Okay, and when are those rules slated to go into effect based upon the certification he provided?
The first couple are September 4th, and then the last two are October 22nd.
Oh, okay. Got it. All right.
Yes. So let's see. First up, we have the new absentee by mail ballot drop-off procedure. So this is a new rule that required any locations that don't have a drop box to have a chain of custody form completed by the person who's delivering those ballots. as well as they will provide ID, and then they have to fill out a chain of custody form as for their own ballot, and then any other ballots that they're delivering, and show that they are one of the approved relations or caregivers that can drop off ballots. So we created a standardized process across those 6 locations that don't have drop boxes. So the site manager will be the one to handle those, so they'll check the individual's ID, and then, like I said, that individual will fill out 1 chain of custody form per ballot. And then I know there's been a lot of questions about, you know, are those forms being completed at locations with drop boxes? The form very clearly says to not be completed at locations with drop boxes. So to avoid confusion, we provided the sites that do have drop boxes a laminated copy of that form, so that way they can show voters if they ask, like, you know, aren't I supposed to fill out a form? I heard there's a new rule. They can show them, you know, this is the form, and it clearly says that it's not to be completed at locations with drop boxes. So we'll have those there. So, and then, of course, those managers will secure those ballots and return them with their voted ballots at the end of the night. They go in a separate bag, and so those ballots, when the couriers get to our office, they hand those ballots directly into the custody of an absentee by mail employee, and then the voted ballots from that site get handed into the custody of an AIP employee.
Okay. Probably this same process here to raise any questions about the processes that you're explaining or sharing with us on a rule-by-rule basis.
Yeah, that'll be great. There's a few. So that'll
Right,
be
I
good.
figured as much. So just to be certain, you said that there is, the site manager is responsible for this process, if you will, obviously only in those locations where the form must be completed.
Correct.
Okay. And then I do recall from our previous meeting, there was some lengthy discussion with respect to whether a form, well, first and foremost, the form is provided by the Secretary of State, correct?
Correct.
Right. And my understanding is we don't have the ability to change that form.
That's my understanding.
Okay. And then I know that we had some lengthy discussion at the last meeting with regard to whether a form must be completed for each ballot, or if I have the ability to bring in my husband and my daughter's ballot, can I then complete one form for those 2 ballots? And
Yeah.
I believe where we left it, there was, you intended to have some outreach to the Secretary of State's office for clarification?
Yes, in our meeting we had with Blake last week or the week before, we discussed this, and everyone agreed that it's 1 form per ballot. And so that's how all jurisdictions are moving forward.
Okay, and then finally, on the laminated form, again, that laminated form will be at those locations that do not require that the form be completed.
Correct.
And the laminated form, it will be clearly delineated. I don't know whether you're highlighting it or something, but that it's very visible and easily readable that a form is not required at those locations where drop boxes are located.
Right.
Okay. Does anyone else have questions with respect to this process?
I could be confusing this with another rule, but wasn't there also discussion surrounding if the form wasn't filled out, that they had to be accepted as provisional?
Correct.
Can you please expound on that?
Sure. So this is an interesting part of this rule because the Georgia Code outlines what constitutes a provisional ballot and how we count that ballot, right? So that ballot goes through the cure process in order for us to count that ballot. And the Georgia Code is really clear about what reasons we can reject an absentee by mail ballot and end up not counting it at all. This doesn't fall in that area, so it's a little bit of figuring that out. So we are going to do a cure process where we, just like we would with a regular provisional cure, where we reach out to the voter and we ask them to fill out an affidavit that they authorized someone to drop off their ballot for them or that they did it themselves. And then we will go forward with the cure process as we do with absentee by mail ballots. There are some questions about when it comes to that provisional Friday, if we don't have cure affidavits for those ballots. I believe it's my understanding that we still have to count those ballots because, like I said, the code outlines why we can reject ballots and why we can't, and this is not one of the reasons why absentee by mail ballots can be rejected.
So, does anyone else have questions? I know you do. Go right ahead. I don't want to jump ahead of you.
My question will be simple, actually. I just want to make sure that we track that very meticulously so that we're able to clarify what came in as provisional under this new form.
Absolutely, absolutely. And anytime we mail or email someone a provisional notice, it also goes on their voter registration record. And so we have proof, we have a scanned proof that we contacted them in that way. So we'll make sure to do it on the front end and on the back end.
Cool.
That we received it provisionally and that we notified them appropriately.
And do you have sort of the letter and the verbiage and that kind of stuff that you're going to use for because I assume it's going to be different than traditional provisional?
Yes, we're still
curing.
working. The main counties, it was just us in Gwinnett, but DeKalb is also going to be accepting absentee ballots at other locations. So we're working together to make sure, since we weren't provided a standardized cure from the Secretary of State's office, that we are at least amongst ourselves providing a standardized cure. That way all voters have similar experiences.
And Daniel, just in terms of legally, is that something you would review before it goes out to voters? I
can't, not normally, but I can.
Okay. I'm just curious because it's a shaky ground, right? If we're saying this is provisional, but we can't really say it's provisional.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's actually where my question was going to go with respect to the fact that the Georgia Code specifically, as I understand it, Mrs. Fall and Mr. White, the Georgia Code specifically sets out the reasons that a county office can reject a provisional ballot. The failure to include this particular form is not among those delineated reasons as set out in the Georgia Code for rejecting a ballot. So it kind of, this particular rule puts our office and other offices in a somewhat precarious situation because we're coloring outside of the lines that are set forth in the election code. Okay. Ms. Fisher, it's not on. Just gonna let you know it's on.
Thank you.
Of course.
You may prefer I leave it off.
Everybody has a right to speak.
Have we entertained the thought that there is a code that clearly states that only a family member, there's 3 or 4 different people who could, a guardian, legal guardian, et cetera, can drop that ballot legally? Was that considered under being able to reject it, as we have no idea to the relationship of who dropped those ballots? Especially in the case of multiple ballot drops.
Are you saying in terms of like how we respond to them? I mean, there's a very specific list of things you can, in the code section about why you can reject absentee ballots, and that's historically what the notices have said, is like, we're sending this back as provisional for one of these reasons. I don't think there's a problem. The SEV rule is saying we need to send it back, and let them know they need to cure it with that, and so I think you just have to cite to the rule instead of the,
What I'm saying is, and this occurred multiple times in 2020, where people were dropping ballots for non-family members, multiple ballots, and there is a code that does address who can drop a ballot off. And if we have no proof of who dropped that off, and that's my question, when we were deciding how we deal with these ballots with no form, was that law considered?
And if I might just interject, Mr. White, before you respond, the absence of the form doesn't necessarily mean that there is the absence of the relationship that you're setting forth as it relates to the code, so we can't make that assumption. But yeah, Mr. White, if you'll go ahead and answer that, please.
But to respond to you before he responds, that would be part of the cure process, where you contact the voter and say, who did you authorize to drop this off? Because that is part of the statute that should be entertained, in my not so humble opinion.
Understood. Mr. White?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm a little unclear. I mean, maybe y'all asking me, should we not do this? I didn't hear anything saying we shouldn't notify them. So I think we're just talking about.
Yeah, I believe that's what's being proposed here, and I don't want to, wait, just let me finish. Well, no, let me finish. What I believe I hear being proposed here, Mr. White, is you've got a list, an enumerated list of the reasons that you can reject an absentee ballot. And that's enumerated in the code. However, there's also a provision in the code that sets forth the relationships that must exist to the extent that I want to go and drop a ballot off. In the absence of signing that form that sets forth, I have that relationship, and in the absence of that particular requirement being among the list of reasons why I can object, or for that matter, reject a absentee ballot, is the failure to know, sounds like, the failure to know whether that relationship existed, sufficient reason to then reject that ballot. Is that correct, Ms. Fisher? I thought that's what I heard. Mr. White?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a problem with it. I mean, I think it's more, and I think it's covered by the SEB, the state's guidance on how to implement the SEB rule. And I think I think that's their justification for it, and to the extent that the board would be following that rule and sending the notices, then I think that's okay. I don't see a problem with. I'm sort of missing the. I understood what your question is. There was some concern about coloring outside the lines, but there's to date, I don't know of anybody that's challenged it, and I don't know of, or at least anything that's been upheld, and so it's in place, and the state's telling us how to do it. So would I prefer it would be better if it were in the statute, or at least that those two statutes work together.
Right.
But I think it's fine. I don't have a problem with sending it back and saying that this form wasn't submitted and it doesn't comply with the SEB rule.
I don't think it was a question of whether we would send that form. I think it's a question of, to the extent, the next step.
Yeah.
Once that form is sent, or we've attempted to cure that provisional absentee ballot, this is outside of the normal type of absentee ballot issue that we would be curing if we do not hear from the voter that cast that absentee ballot or that provided it to me to, let's say I have a kid, he or she's in college, and they just don't respond. Then do we not accept that absentee ballot because we do not have that form, nor was it cured?
Yeah, I think so. I think it'd be equivalent to, it'd be like if somebody dropped a ballot off here at the commission offices and we didn't really know, like, it'd be this, you'd sort of treat it the same way. I think that's what they're trying to do, is sort of establish, like, do you know where you get the ballot from? And so I think you would not accept that ballot. If someone left a ballot here, that would be my understanding of how the rule was intended.
How is that different than me going to an advanced voting location and putting my ballot in the drop box there, because I'm not filling out a form, I'm not declaring who I'm dropping it in, I just walk in, drop it in, and walk out.
And not just your ballot, but your husband's ballot.
Well, those are all policy considerations for the legislature. The legislature said you don't have to do it in the SEP, but the legislature said you don't have to do it where there's a drop box. I mean, that's just, it's in the statute.
Right.
And then the other one, but the rule about the SCB, dropping it at other deputized locations or whatever, says you have to have the form. That doesn't seem like a very logical distinction to me, but that's what's in the law in the SEB rule, so.
I know in speaking with Gwinnett before DeKalb's board voted, that in speaking with the director there, I know that it hasn't been traditional practice for this board to need to have a provisional meeting Friday at 5 p.m. after the deadline. And so he said that there's been instances where they would have to do that. So it's likely that when the 5 p.m. Friday deadline hits and no more cures are accepted, right, then we would, since we're going to be together, I would present those provisional ballots that are in between, that haven't been cured, and maybe I'm not sure if we can reject them. That's not my decision to make. And then I present those to the board at a provisional meeting, and then the board gets to vote whether or not to count those ballots. So I know that's what Gwinnett does. I think that that's kind of the practice. It's normally been one or two, random weird cases, but this would, I think, maybe fall under that, where it'd be presented to the board and the board would vote.
Mr. Bruni.
So are you saying we need to stay there until 5?
I do believe so. So we'll have to order pizza.
No cheese on mine, please.
I think what I would recommend, at least for this conversation, is that we document a process that the office is using for this circumstance of provisional curing needed on this type of absentee ballot. And I think that that's important because when we communicate with voters, we're communicating something that's different than a traditional provisional as defined by the law. So I do think that's an important distinction, and we need to be cautious as to how we handle this, because it is, you know, if we're making that decision about whether or not to count a ballot, we need to have a process in place by where we're making that determination. So that's what I would say at this point. We just need to have a process documented, and we do need to really track that pretty closely.
Absolutely.
And as part of that process, the notification or the notice, however we're intending to send it out, is vetted by Mr. White such that it's consistent with Georgia law. Sure. Okay. Anything else on this particular rule? Okay. Next up.
So in the next paragraph of this new rule, there's a new rule about video surveillance on those ABM drop boxes once they're closed, so once they've been locked. So we have 6 locations with drop boxes, only 3 needed cameras to be installed. So we're grateful for our non-county partners like Smyrna Community Center being willing to allow us to install a Cobb County camera in their non-Cobb County facility. So they were great. We got them in last week, and then the remaining 2 were installed today. I had them up on my laptop before the meeting started, so everything looked great. The rooms look awesome. So we're in full compliance of that rule. In addition to the rule requires a 24-month retention period, and we've worked with ITS to ensure that these recordings will be placed on a separate cloud, because that's a really long retention period for video, and so they want to make sure that they're on their own cloud as to not be affected by that retention period. So very grateful for ITS and helping us with that. It was a huge lift for them.
Right, and so do you have questions? Okay, yes, we'll tag team. So I just want to be certain, especially to the extent that we have our Cobb citizens that are likely tuned in. This particular rule, the ballot drop boxes, so ABM drop boxes, are inside of a building.
Correct.
Inside of a room. The building is locked after hours, and so we have a camera recording a absentee by mail drop box 24 hours in a locked building.
It's only, the rule says at the close of polls each day
from 7 p.m.
shall initiate, to 7 a.m. So in those 12 hours that were closed or on the Sunday, that there's video recording of that drop box, and that it should be kept for 24 months.
Okay. Perhaps not a question for today, but if you could provide us with some type of, to the extent you can grab it, find it, a sense of the cost associated with that retention period, the installation of the cameras, it would just be good information to have.
Sure, I know I have an invoice for the cost, and so I'll get the invoice for the cloud portion.
Okay, excellent. Ms. Mossbacher, did you have questions? Okay, excellent. If there are no further questions about the video surveillance for ABM drop boxes.
Sorry, 1 second.
No worries.
These are the ones that you provided. And then just this one. Yeah, but that's what we said. Okay, sorry, team huddle.
No worries, what was that?
Making sure that we're on the same page about which rules we're talking about today. So, because there's 2 separate guidances that were, not guidances, certifications that were set out.
Right.
And so we are just double checking on those. So I'm gonna skip the ones that
Or not in effect yet.
are not in effect yet, since they're not in effect yet.
Right.
I was a little ahead of myself there. And then we'll just talk about the ones that are already in effect.
Okay, and those were the ones that went into effect, I believe, on September the 4th?
Yes,
Or-
they were September the 4th.
And then that's why I'd asked the question earlier with regard to those that are set to go into effect on September the 22nd.
October the 22nd.
Pardon me, October the 22nd.
Yes.
To go back a month.
Yes, because we only were given certification documentation for 2 of those rules and not all of them. And so I can wait and cover those.
Right,
when we have all of them.
we were huddling, I was recommending that if we're not covering all the rules that are going into effect on October 22nd, because they're not in effect yet, and some of them are being challenged either by this board or by other groups, we need to wait until those actually do go into effect. And because the Secretary of State may have sent certified copies, but he hasn't issued guidance
Right.
other than sending this. So.
Okay.
I
Ms.
think
Fisher?
it may be important for the public to know which rules those are that have been certified, but that we aren't going to discuss due to our lawsuit.
I don't know that I believe it was a matter of the lawsuit. Have we received guidance from the Secretary of State with respect to those?
No guidance. No
And
guidance.
with regard to the 2 that we've covered thus far, have we received guidance from the Secretary of State with regard to those?
We did receive guidance on the form. And they provided the form,
Okay.
the one before this.
But can you clarify, the additional ones were certified by the Secretary of State with his stamp and seal?
Well, I'll answer that.
I'm a little confused.
So there, the Secretary of State enters, the certification of the rules is just a sort of a ministerial thing where they submit it, whatever SEB passes, they review it, make sure it's in form, and then they certify it as being submitted. Sort of the same process when, let's say, a local government passed a redistricting map and submitted it and called it an amendment to their, to their enabling legislation. The Secretary of State would stamp that as certified and received by the office, and so that's what this is. They're certifying that they received it from the SEB, and they're not. And so there's a set of rules that were adopted within the last month or so that were certified as being received by the office, and that they would become effective on October 22nd. But my recommendation is that because some of those are currently being challenged in litigation and may or may not become effective, and the Secretary of State has yet to provide guidance on those, that those all ought to be treated the same at this point.
I think we're ready to move on to the next one.
Next one, short and sweet, 183-1-12-.12. This went into effect September 16th, and this is requiring that the poll manager and 2 witnesses shall record the number of scanned ballots from each scanner on a recap form to be developed by the Secretary of State. We already do this on one of our own recap forms, one of our many recap forms. In our meeting Friday with Blake, or Director Evans, I should say, I apologize. We talked about this, and it did not appear that they were going to develop their own forms, since most counties do that, but we'll see, since this rule particularly asks for them to create the form. We look forward to any guidance, whether they say, here's a form, or continue to use your own form. If you don't have one, use ours. We really like our forms, so we hope we don't have to change them. So that one's pretty easy.
Okay. Question for you. This is a scanner recap form that needs to be completed during the course of AIP?
This is
or just election night?
This particular rule is just after the polls close on election night.
Okay, just wanted to be certain, again, for our members, or our members of the community that are watching. If it's a form that needs to be completed tomorrow at the close of voting, we would obviously want to note that, but that is not the case with respect to this recap form.
Right, for this rule, we do them for AIP every day, though, so we do above what this new rule requests.
Okay, and that's a process that, again, predates the implementation of this rule?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
So it indicates that we've been accountable and transparent with regard to this, even in the absence of the SEB rule?
Correct.
Yes. Okay, great. Anyone have questions with respect to this rule? No? Okay, moving on to the next one.
All right, so the last rule in this packet is about the pre-certification meeting. So there's kind of 2 parts of this. So obviously the meeting itself, which we have scheduled. So the board voted to have that meeting at our office at 995 Roswell. So we'll have that. It will be open to the public. And then the rule also requests in section F, numbers 2 through 5, 6. It kind of requests different information to be provided at that meeting. So I wanted to make sure that we covered that. So my team is working to make sure we have what's possible. So the first part that's required is the total number of ballots cast by each vote method by precinct. So at 3 p.m. we won't have the provisional totals nor the absentee by mail totals. So I just wanted to denote that we will have election day and the advanced voting totals by precinct, absolutely. The next requirement is the numbered list of voters containing those voters for each of those methods. So again, noting we'll have it for election day and advanced voting. We will not have the final number list of voters for absentee nor provisional, since that's not done till 5 p.m. And then under that, it says that the board should examine for duplicates, it should be sorted by precinct, and that we should count by number of unique voter ID numbers reported by precinct. So I'll make sure that that information that we can't have is sorted in that manner and has been examined for duplicates prior to the meeting. So you guys will have that to review before you get there.
Okay. With regard to the first bulleted items, you indicated that we would not have absentee, nor would we have provisional because of a 5 p.m. deadline. That's a deadline set by the state, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So then we will not have complete information to review at this 3 p.m. meeting?
Correct.
Through no fault of our own?
Right, we'll have
Nor
to
our office?
wait till 5, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Or after 5,
Ms.
I should
Fisher?
say.
When you said we wouldn't have the numbers on absentee by mail, you mean just the provisional absentee by mail? Because we should have absentee by mail on November 5th.
We can accept absentee by mail cures and UOCAVA ballots until Friday at 5 p.m. So we won't have I can't create the numbered list of voters until that deadline passes, because there's still an opportunity for those two types of absentee by mail ballots to be counted.
But we could get that minus the cures and the provisional, correct?
I'm not aware of there being a practice of giving a partial numbered list of voters. I'd have to check and see if that's possible to request that prior to the completion of
Don't we
those.
already do those reports every day? The Secretary of State posts them almost daily, if not daily.
I don't believe the numbered list of voters is.
No, they aren't a specific numbered list, no.
Right.
It's just who voted how.
Right.
Absentee or in person.
Right. I'd have to see what they're giving and seeing if that would work for what this particular rule is requesting, because it's requesting the list of voters who voted divided by those 4 types, those 4 voting methods.
The rule requested that?
Yes,
or
it says
I
a list of all voters who voted in the election shall be compiled, including by category the number of voters who voted election day in person, advanced voting, absentee, and provisionally.
Okay.
Did anyone have questions or comments with respect to this? I'm sorry, Mrs. Fall. Did you have anything further you want to share with regard to this particular rule?
There's one more slide about other things that are required for
Okay.
this rule.
Do you want to address any concerns about this portion of it, or you want to wait until you're completed?
We can talk about this portion.
Okay, does anyone have questions for Mrs. Fall with regard to what's currently displayed related to our compliance with this particular rule, or the portion of this particular rule displayed?
I do have one more question. Examine for duplicates?
That's what the rule says. So after the sentence I read, the next sentence says, this list shall be examined for duplicates. The list shall then be sorted by precinct. The total number of unique voter IDs from each precinct shall be counted. The total number of unique voters who voted by each vote method shall be reported for each precinct.
Okay, so just a random question here. Duplicate votes like we had in the municipal elections, or would that be duplicate votes with the exact same voter with a different voter ID?
I believe since it's asking to get the total number of unique voter IDs, that it would be duplicate voter IDs. So it's having one voter ID show up more than once.
Okay.
It's a little presumptuous there, but that would be my interpretation of it.
Because the rule doesn't state.
Yes.
Okay.
That's, I think when you read it, that would be, as I put it on the slide, that would be how I interpret it.
Okay. And does it indicate who is to examine for those duplicates?
I believe it says the board.
Okay.
I guess maybe not in that section, but it does in the next, for each precinct, the board member shall compare.
Okay. Alrighty. Just want us to know what our obligations are.
Yes.
Anyone else have questions with respect to this particular rule or this portion of this particular rule? Okay. Moving on to the next portion of it.
So on the next one, continuing what the rule asks for is that the board, like I said, compares for each precinct the total number of ballots cast to the total number of unique voter ID numbers. And then it asks to investigate discrepancies. So it says the board shall determine the method of voting in which the discrepancy exists. The board shall investigate the discrepancy and no vote shall be counted from that precinct until the results of the investigation are presented to the board as required in Georgia Code 21-2-493B. And then the last section of this rule is, and I put it in quotes there, board members shall be permitted to examine all election-related documentation created during the conduct of elections prior to the certification of rules. As you'll know, it's a lot of documents, so I know we talked at the previous meeting, but I wanted to make sure that it was mentioned here as well. If you have specific things you'd like to see, please let me know as soon as possible, but hopefully no later than November 6th at 10 a.m. It takes time to generate these reports, especially in Jarvis, and so I want to make sure that what you're asking for, you have Friday at 3 p.m. And so just as soon as you can get me your list of what you'd like to see, I would really appreciate it.
Okay. Does anyone, I have a couple of requests. They'll be easy ones. Does anyone have anything for Ms. Fall with regard to this portion? So one request, if I can impose upon you, if you will send us a calendar invite with this deadline.
Sure.
Just because we want to be certain that we're providing you with a list of the information in a timely fashion that gives you and the team an opportunity to pull those reports together for us.
Absolutely, I can do that.
And then as it relates to what you will be presenting to us, do we believe that that presentation will take place in the boardroom there in the lobby?
We're going to use the AIP room, just
Okay.
that there's plenty of room for the public.
Okay.
And so we will we'll do that, and then I'm working with communications to make sure we can live stream from that room as well.
And that is you knew exactly where I was going. Okay, great. Anyone have questions with regard to the processes and procedures we're putting in place? Mr. Bruning?
I'll just point out that the November 6th, 10 a.m. deadline, we're going to be there November 5th, possibly until 10 a.m. So we may not be able to ask you or to provide this list.
Yes, I'm hoping you can get them to me before that, but I understand if something comes up, of course I want to be accommodating and whatever you guys ask for, whether you meet my made-up deadline or not, I'll provide it for you, so.
If we're still there at 10 a.m. November 6th, I will not be providing any list.
That's fair.
At 10 a.m.
I don't think I will either.
Great.
If I may, I think the request is actually so that we could provide it even in advance, further advance. Like if there are things that we know report-wise that we want to see, that we would.
I'll be sure to
That-
have
that's-
what's been mentioned in this rule and what's on these slides. But anything further, if there's particular recap sheets or oaths or anything that you want to see, just let me know and I'll be sure to have that prepared.
And then I think if we have some way of making sure that.
It's a comprehensive list as opposed to peppering her with
Yes.
separate lists?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be great.
Then we all know what's being requested, we don't duplicate, whatever. We just need to think of how we organize that.
Okay. We'll work with you to come up with a process to, such that we send a comprehensive list as opposed to you getting an email from me at 2 a.m. As you know, that's when I send them. But I have started scheduling them if you haven't noticed. And thank you for that helpful hint. And we'll go from there. Anything further? Okay.
Okay, so that's it for the election brief. So next, I just have 2 slides on director's update, because that's pretty much everything we've been doing. Sure. Any questions before I move forward? Okay.
No questions? Go right ahead.
Great. So I'll skip through those. Okay, so personnel, we've recently hired our business manager. We're very excited about her starting and joining our team. She'll start 10/28, so she will be thrown into it, and she's pretty excited. We also recently hired an administrative assistant to me, so she will start 11/12. And so she's an internal candidate, so I don't want to take her away from her team prior to Election Day. So that's why we're doing that later start date. And then that's when Miss Brooks will move part-time, become the part-time HR tech. And so she'll still be doing all of our HR work, but moving to a part-time role to spend more time with her beautiful daughters. So really happy for her. We currently have 2 jobs posted. Both are voter registration specialists. We're interviewing 2 positions for election coordinator, 1 in the prep center. And we're really, really proud of this. So I wanted to highlight, we only have 15 vacancies, and that includes seasonals. So we're only at 0.8% unstaffed. So we're really grateful to my managers for doing lots of interviews and getting those positions filled. And I think that's why we very minimally needed to rely on temp agencies. I know in speaking with the previous director, she told me how many temps they would bring on prior to a presidential or an even year election. And we only have, I believe, 10 temps working in ABM, helping get those applications into batches for pre-sort. So we're really grateful to have seasonal employees in those roles and to be at such a high staffed level for our department.
Okay. With respect to your business manager, I know that is a net new role. If you could just share with the balance of the board and the public the function that this person will be performing and the benefit you believe it will provide to the office.
Absolutely. So the business manager is a new role to our office. Since I don't have a deputy, that means I'm the final sign-off on everything, whether it's a $7 Amazon order for stickers or it's a $7,000 order for something. And so the business manager will really be over the fiscal and administrative team. So they'll be able to do all of our purchasing, procurement. They'll be able to sign off on some purchases up to a certain amount. To take that off my plate because it's a lot. We obviously order a lot of things in elections, so that takes up a lot of time. So they'll have a fiscal tech 1 that they'll work with. So they'll do everything, accounts payable, payroll, like I said, procurement, purchasing. They're coming from Fulton County, from a purchasing role in Fulton County. Luckily, Fulton, with their finance department, she's new to elections, and so luckily they use the same financial software as us. So she's very well versed in the software that we use here in Cobb. So she'll be that. Carly, Ms. Brooks will report to her, so she'll have the HR tech under her, as well as the communication specialist. So she'll kind of be that department-wide crossover in between in terms of administrative and fiscal responsibilities.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions with regard to the personnel update? Okay. Yes, sir.
Of the total 187 vacancies, how many of those are permanent full-time versus whatever it is you call others?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And to be certain, there are 15 vacancies.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, 187 positions total in the department.
Right.
We have 33 full-time permanent, I believe 31 part-time permanent, and then about 125 seasonals. So the vast majority of those are seasonal employees. Some of them are year-round seasonals, some of them are real seasonals like our facilitators, but it takes all of us together to make it happen.
Okay.
Awesome. Any additional questions? Okay.
Last slide, we're really excited. Our social media is live. So we're starting off on Facebook and Instagram. So you can follow us to get up-to-date information. We're so grateful for our partners in comms for assisting us. But sometimes we need to get information out in a really fast manner. And we want to have one location people know they can look at. So on Facebook will be Cobb County Elections and Registration. You can see our gorgeous new logo. We're really excited about there. And then on Instagram will be Cobb Elections. So we're looking forward to meeting really 2 big, large groups of voters that we don't really communicate with effectively now. So we'll be posting lots of information, updates with early voting as that continues, and anything else that pops up, that'll be the first place to look.
Will there be links to each of these on our website such that they're easily accessible, as well as to, I guess, the Cobb County comms. I just want to be certain that if we're, obviously, we have not a new team member, but a new role that a team member is serving in that capacity to curate the content that we're putting out there. We obviously, if we're going to provide this resource, make certain that our Cobb citizens or Cobb voters are aware of it.
Yes, I will double check to see if we can get it in the footer of our website, and then I'll get with Mr. Cabot about the county website as well.
Okay. Anyone else have questions about the launch of our social media sites? I think it'll be I think we have to meet voters where they are, and voters are on social media, so.
Absolutely.
Among other places.
Yes. So that's all I have. I know that was a lot, so thank you for bearing through that, but we're excited, we're ready. The staff is really excited about this election. Everyone feels solid, and we're really proud of the work we've done in 3 elections already this year, and we look forward to seeing all of our voters, all of our friends back at the polling places starting tomorrow.
Okay, great. Looks like I'm next on the agenda. So the only update I have is really just to the extent that you all did not tune in. I believe everybody was either in person, myself and board member Fisher were there. I believe others were tuned in to the state election board meeting that took place last Tuesday. And just for the benefit of those that might be tuned in. So on the 23rd of September, during the state election board meeting, there was a reference to voter challenges and a quote investigation that would be undertaken at the direction of the state election board to be conducted by Michael Cohen, the executive director. And again, that conversation and discussion took place on the 23rd. I will note that this board did not receive any communication from the state election board until I believe on October the 3rd at about 12 noon. We received an email that was directed to Mrs. Fall. She subsequently shared that email with us, and we were invited to a non-mandatory quote discussion in connection presumably with this investigation. Thereafter, on the following day, on the 4th, Mr. Cohen stopped by our office, and Ms. Fall had a conversation with him again about this quote investigation, but there was no process, at least not similar to the process that the Secretary of State's office generally undertakes when there is some type of complaint related to a action or omission coming out of our elections office. Essentially, and for those of you that might not be aware of this, to the extent that there is a complaint alleging some wrongdoing or minimally just a question with regard to an act or omission coming out of the elections office, a complaint is generally filed with the SOS. Sometimes we've even dropped a dime on ourselves and self-reported to the extent that there is something going on. That complaint is then assigned to an investigator that's there in the Secretary of State's office. The investigator generally reaches out to our office, and from there, there's a process. Back and forth, the investigator inquires, requests information, and we provide that information. None of that took place with regard to this investigation that was to be undertaken with regard to, quote, voter challenges. At any rate, again, Mr. Cohen stopped by the office on Friday, the 4th, had a conversation with our elections director, notwithstanding the fact that the elections director doesn't make decisions, respectfully. She doesn't make decisions with regard to voter challenges. That's made by the superintendent. The superintendent is this 5-person board. Subsequently, I found out that Mr. Cohen did, I believe, reach out to Mrs. Fisher, a board member, but did not contact the entire board. At any rate, on Tuesday, myself and Mr. White, did attend the state election board meeting. I made just a very brief statement. Other statements were made. Our counsel spoke on our behalf. However, there's been no formal written communication either from the state election board or for that matter from us to the state election board with regard to this quote investigation. All that being said, I wanted to raise, and I did speak with Mr. White about this, and I also spoke with Ms. Fisher about this to the extent that there was outreach to her about the actions of this board as the superintendent. Just wanted to get the board to weigh in on reaching out to the state election board in writing or minimally responding. And again, this is not a substantive response, as I shared with Ms. Fisher and Mr. White. It would really just be acknowledging the fact that this quote investigation took place and, in my instance, raising an objection to the process, not the substance as was provided and discussed at the meeting, but it would be the process, in as much that we did not receive any type of written communication. And really the primary reason to submit this would also be to request a copy of the report, as Dr. Johnson, the vice chair of the state election board, shared with us that there would be a report completed. I did not personally see a report that Mr. Cohen was reading from, but I do believe it's important to the extent that any actions taken by this board as superintendent are documented or provided for in this report. We should see it. So minimally wanted to raise that in for everyone's consideration and go from there. Obviously, we would all have an opportunity to take a look at the letter, but again, it's a matter of acknowledging the fact that, quote, an investigation was undertaken, objecting to the process, not substance, but the process that it was undertaken, and requesting the report. So, happy to hear what anyone says. I'm also happy to take the lead to the extent that I was present in drafting that, but we'll provide it for everyone's input.
My comment on this would have been better served under new business if you were going to ask for an action.
It's not an action, it's getting a sense of what the board is comfortable with. And it would be only after your review of a document, and Ms. Fisher, you are aware that this was a possibility because you and I actually had a conversation about this. And I believe you said you were okay with it to the extent you were good with the language.
Well, I would have expected it to be under new business,
Okay.
but not under the board, your comments. But my comment on that, I don't think the board should take any action until we read that report, which my understanding, the reason there wasn't a written report was I believe Mr. Cohen was very ill for 3 or 4 days. I don't know that for sure, but that was what the rumor mill was. But I don't think we should take any action until we see what the report was. I think it's unfortunate it was called an investigation because as far as my conversation with Mr. Cohen, I don't really think he was investigating anything. He asked me to confirm a couple of things that our voter challenger had given him. So that would be my preference.
Right. And it's not to take action per se. I don't believe.
You said you would be happy to take the lead, so to me that is giving you an action. So that's just.
Well, let's hear from everyone else and then I'll respond.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any concerns with minimally acknowledging the process? So yes, an action would be the actual writing of something to acknowledge the process, and then again, requesting a copy of this report. I think it's important to get that request submitted to them in writing to the extent that there's been no communication in writing absent a very general email that was sent to our elections director as opposed to the superintendent that actually took the actions that were to be, quote, investigated. So yes, I do believe it's important to get that in writing submitted to the election board. but I'm happy to hear from anyone else.
I watched the meeting online. I wasn't able to attend in person, and I heard your comments and Mr. White's comments, and I appreciate and agree with the comments that due process was not followed and it should have been followed. And so if we believe that should be put in writing and sent to them as what we expect going forward, I'm fully supportive of that.
I agree. I think we need to acknowledge what occurred. I also think it's imperative that if there was some sort of investigation, that there's a report that we are allowed to view. And I think compare that to our own notes that we received from the meeting with Director Fall, because we only know one side right at this point, and then there was a presentation made, but none of us were invited to participate in that discussion, and I do think our due process was violated.
Right. Okay. Mr. Bruning?
Certainly okay with me. I mean, I think we need to have a copy of the report.
Absolutely.
No question. And I think we need to say that the process we didn't feel due process was followed, that we weren't communicated with, or we didn't understand the issue. And I agree with Debbie. This whole thing could have been much simplified by not calling it an investigation. It was, from what I heard Director Cohen say on the online broadcast, it was more a fact-finding, feeling out what's going on process. He admitted he's not a lawyer, he's not an investigator, he's a former legislator, and so I agree. We definitely ought to show some sign of concern about the process that was followed, and we definitely need to ask for a report, because just based on what's transpired, there may be a report. We just nobody bothered to send it to us. We certainly should ask for it.
Okay, excellent. So, again, I don't know that there is a vote required. Mr. White, do you believe a vote is required here? Okay, and that's why I was suggesting that there was no action to be taken, but formal action that requires a vote. But yes, obviously there would be the action of writing and providing everyone with a copy of it, an opportunity to weigh in, such that we align on the communication that we'll send to the state election board. Again, acknowledging what took place, raising concerns about the process, and then requesting the report. Those are the three items I believe I heard that we would include in the communication. That's it as far as a report from me. Board member comments?
I do have comments that I stayed from the previous meeting to spare everybody. I do want to address Jennifer's affidavit that's filed in one of the many lawsuits concerning the rules. Rest assured, I don't have time to look up 562,000 voters to see how they voted, nor is that my desire. I found that comment to be quite actually out of line. Just for the public, in case you've read that lawsuit, the other member who voted against certification isn't on this board, so he no longer exists. However, the affidavit suggests he does. And as far as the numbered voter registration list, I already have access to personal information through the voter roll that I purchased through the Secretary of State. And I can honestly say I have never, nor will never, use that information to look up how anyone votes, because that is one of our most sacred rights. So I just want to make that really clear. And I also want to make really clear that throughout the affidavit, she referenced the Board of Elections and actions that we made her uncertain of how we are supposed to deal with it as a board. That affidavit was not seen, at least by myself, but I also believe no one else saw it prior to it being filed, and it was not filed for this board. It was filed for an individual. I just wanted to make that clear. And I will comment, hadn't planned on it, on the state election board investigation. I came from an industry that does a lot of investigations. This was not an investigation. I do believe the intent of it is not to come after any county for what they have done or haven't done. I believe it is to provide guidelines so the voter challenges is consistent throughout the state instead of this county having this policy and this county having that policy. I believe that's the intent of the investigation, not to come after anyone. So with that in mind, I'm not sure that that would fall under some of the things previously mentioned. And I will also mention that I personally spoke at that meeting, for those who didn't watch it, because I am still very conflicted about two rules we have in our policy. So I fully support the state election board providing guidelines on what is legal and what isn't legal that is currently being done. And if you wonder what two it is that I disagree with, one of them is refusing a challenge on the inactive voter list. Throughout the state, and a lot of this is because of how our Secretary of State looks at this, if you make it to the inactive list, you don't come off until you've been on there for at least 5 years and didn't vote in 2 federal elections. That's ridiculous. If you have moved out of state and you have gotten a driver's license in another state, and you have a homestead exemption in another state, and you made a change of address in another state, and it happens to match the data presented that they're registered to vote, some of them do vote, some of them have homestead exemptions. There's a signature required for every single one of those things I just mentioned. There also is a state statute we continue to ignore. It's called the residency statute. 21-2-217 clearly spells out when you should be removed because you are no longer an eligible voter. The NVRA lists a dozen plus times eligible voter. It lists ineligible twice. And then it goes on to list the 2 reasons that you should be removed because you become ineligible. One of those is residency. I will also say that in another part of Section 8 in the NVRA, we continue to ignore. It lists clearly, as does HAVA, a homestead exemption is a reason that you are considered no longer eligible and should be removed from the voter rolls. And yet we continue to ignore it. The other policy that we passed and is in effect is charging people to execute their constitutional right, and that is just wrong on so many levels. And oh, by the way, 21-2-18 prohibits it. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Mrs. Fisher. Is there any further comment? Mrs. Mossbacher?
I just think it's important, since that was, that was a nice pontification on the law, that the public does recognize that we do have a board attorney who we seek counsel from, who's an election expert in matters related to election law. Ms. Fisher is not an election attorney. There is nothing that we are doing that is in violation of the law. We have an attorney who does advise us. We do, unlike the state election board, we do take our attorney's advice, and we do implement policies with his authority and expertise. I also take offense to the sort of slanderous, comments that we are not following the law when it is our staff that is implementing the law and keeping the voter rolls clean according to the law. So I want to make sure that the public understands that our job is to protect all of our voters in this county, and we do that, and we do keep our voter rolls up to date and current.
Thank you, Mrs. Mossbacher. Does anyone else want to provide comments? Ms. Efford? No. I will be brief because I believe there is a need to move into executive session, but I will pick up where Mrs. Mossbacher left off. So first, my thanks to Mrs. Fall and the team, and I know they're not here because they're busy back in the elections office with AIP looming large in just a few hours, 14 hours. But thank you for your guidance and the work that you're doing with the team. And I also want to note, with respect to inactive voters, ironically enough, I was at a voter registration event on October the 5th, and I ran across a gentleman by the name of Mr. Bates. And when he realized, you know, what I feel like I do for a living, although this is a volunteer role, he thanked me. Well, first, he acknowledged the work of our registration office, and he thanked me for that work in as much that Mr. Bates is a Cobb voter. He voted in the May primary. However, when he checked his voter registration a few weeks ago, he was marked inactive. And I'm thinking to myself, notwithstanding what's been shared here, and none of this was orchestrated because I had no idea what Mrs. Fisher's comments would be, but Mr. Bates was inactive. He had been moved to inactive. He wasn't entirely certain why, I believe, based upon it was a very quick conversation, but what he shared with me had something to do with returned mail. And so for me, it underscores the need for the policy as described just a few moments ago, that moving people to inactive, removing people that are inactive. I mean, had Mr. Bates been challenged, we potentially could have removed him from the voter roll when he obviously is a current Cobb voter, voted in May, but somehow he ended up on the inactive voter roll list. He did have a nice photo that he had taken in front of our office, one in which he walked in and he was frowning, and then because you all fixed the problem and got him back on the voter roll as an active voter, he's obviously in a position to vote tomorrow or at whatever point he deems appropriate. But then he was smiling. So I thank you and the team for that. But again, thought it relevant in this forum, given the ongoing discussion about the policies that the majority of this board have adopted. And I think with that, it looks like Ms. Fisher would like to make further board comments. Go
Just
right
a rebuttal to that.
It's not a matter of rebuttal. It was a matter of me sharing what I experienced. That was it. It was a thank you to Ms. There's nothing to rebut. I can't rebut a Cobb voter's experience. But if you feel the need to do so, go right ahead.
You know, I think I've been reminded a couple times not to be rude, that we tell other people not to be rude, not to interrupt, but okay. I think it's important to note he would not have been removed under a challenge if we did it correctly. He would have been investigated by Tate's team, which they do a very good job. They are probably the hardest working employees in Cobb County government, actually. He would not have been removed because it would have showed he voted. So how he got on the inactive list is the question. There are many people on that inactive list that show up on there kind of out of the clear blue sky. They'll be on the list, then they're not on the list, then they're back on the list. So doing a blanket denial because they're on the inactive list when you have proof that they have a change of residency is why I oppose it.
Again, thank you. My point, again, was just to relay a great experience that one of our Cobb voters had with you. And I know from time to time, you hear a lot of bad experiences. I just wanted to be certain to share that good experience with you. At this point, I think we're moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is executive session. Mr. White, I believe there is a need to move into executive session.
Yes, for pending
Okay.
litigation.
We'll entertain a motion.
Actually, we have pending litigation and personnel.
Yep, we'll entertain a motion to move into executive session for the purposes of discussing pending litigation as well as personnel matter.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Is there a second? It's been moved and properly seconded to move into executive session for the purposes of discussing a personnel matter as well as pending litigation. All of those in favor? The motion passes unanimously. For those of you that might be with us for the first time, I will note during executive session, we do request that everyone leave the room. We will attempt to have this discussion as promptly as possible, invite you back into the room, but we do ask that you leave the room at this time. I will entertain a motion to exit executive session.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Bruning. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and properly, oh, thank you, Mrs. Fisher. It's been moved and properly seconded to exit executive session. All those in favor? The motion passes unanimously. The only other thing to do is to note our upcoming meetings. We have a election night meeting on November the 5th that will take place in our offices at 995 Roswell Street. November the 8th, we will have a pre-certification election meeting that will take place again in our offices at 995 Roswell Street. And then the certification regular board meeting of this board will take place on November the 12th here in the BOC room at 100 Cherokee Street. And with that, I adjourn the meeting at 5:46 p.m.